We're talking about intergroup relations and cultures in contact. In this moment, specifically about stereotypes and prejudice. We have to begin by recognizing that intercultural integrations and interactions are necessary and a real fact. Sometimes we take culture for granted because we only think about it when the behaviors learned fail to achieve our goals in some social context. All the ideas we have built in our minds had suddenly changed when we have to deal real-life contexts and situations. To ease the stress of cultural contact, various interventions have been made, such as programs to prepare teachers to understand cultural differences, to integrate behaviors with children not already familiar into the school curriculum, and teaching in languages familiar to the children. These difficulties may come up when intergroup contact brings to people involved understanding the harmful attitudes and the discriminatory behavior of people who would prefer avoid intergroup interactions. These difficulties of intergroup relationships, we have to start by clarifying and understanding stereotypes or generalizations, the functions of prejudice, and the forms that prejudice takes types of interventions. We're going to begin by talking about stereotypes, and we have to know what is actually a stereotype. Well, these are beliefs about a group of people that give insufficient attention to individual differences among members of that group. We have talked about that sometimes when we say that the blacks are, or the Native Americans do not do this or that, or Japanese prefer. So all this content is stereotypical because we are talking about a group of people and we are giving the characteristics of that in general, and when we see an individual of that specific group, we're going to make that relationship with the generalization we have created. The stereotypes about any groups of people are stereotypical unless they clearly include recognition of differences within groups of people. Although stereotypes should not be seen as abnormality, because in fact they reflect people's need to organize and retrieve information that might be useful. When we talk about stereotypes, we're also talking about the development of categories. This process is actually a real part and a real normal part of human thinking. When we say that stereotypes are found when labels are used from people to a certain group. When we refer about labels, we're going to say that they help us to place limits on the behavior of individuals who are assigned a label. This is very relevant when we're focusing and talking about stereotypes as part of a culture, because if similar stereotypes exist about some label group, generation after generation within a society, they become part of a culture. So we have established those labels and those categories about a certain group of people or a culture. Then we're going to transmit that information to other generations, to other people, because of that innate action that human beings have, that is to communicate and to relate with others. So in that moment is where stereotypes become part of a culture. Then we're going to talk about that culture influence behavior. This has to be briefly shared, of course transmitted from generations, and memorable from childhood experiences as well. This all goes in that thing that we have to communicate and to relate. Finally, a very important aspect that we have to take into account when we're talking about the stereotypes are that we need to have 4 characteristics of stereotypes. These, first of all, have to be consciously held. This means that when people use stereotypes, they should be really aware that they are thinking about an individual based on that person's membership in some label group. We already talked about the labels we create on a group. So in this moment, when we're talking about someone individually, we are also making that relationship with the group to which that person belongs to. they will have to be conscious, or when we make a stereotype, we have to be conscious that there will be exceptions to the stereotype, and that we should look for those exceptions. The second characteristic of stereotypes is that they have to be descriptive. Generalizations should describe behaviors and should contain no evaluative comments about the behavior. There can be active search for complexity. When we talk about complexity, we have to look for real information that can be added if reasons are given to the description, because we cannot only talk about a label and create a label, but we have to describe the reasons why we are creating that label. And this is very related with the third characteristic of stereotypes, which is to be accurate. Because generalizations of people is better to be supported by various types of evidence. It's much better whenever it's possible, of course, given that many people have very little contact with members of group of others from their own. And that is very common nowadays because we tend to judge what we actually don't know. The fourth characteristic of stereotype is going to be the first best guess. Any stereotypes should be looked as an only providing direction for a first guess about the way an individual might behave. Then, as we want to discover more information about the individual, then we move beyond that first guess. So we usually are going to make first impression or first comment about a person or a group of people. Then we are going to continue adding consciously new evidence and complexity. We already mentioned complexity in the previous characteristics. Then it's going to be useful information for future interactions. So we're going to start by that first guess and start adding complexity and information. And finally, very related with this characteristic is the fourth one, which is that stereotypes have to be modifiable. When people show willingness to move beyond that first guess we talked previously, they also show willingness to modify the generalization made. So this is based on the additional information we find. So we began from that experience, and then we're going to continue adding more information.
Prejudices are the judgments that respond to those beliefs, feelings that people have about other cultures and different social groups, places, behaviors, without being in contact with them, without acquire the knowledge enough about them. So these prejudices can be positive, like those that we have about some places that we consider are idyllic for us, or negative, of course. Negative stereotypes can be related with prejudices. These prejudices can create some limits and actually can condition how people behave generation over generation, how they live actually. So these limits can be divided into elements. In groups, those which people interact frequently, due that they have good feelings about them, they feel comfortable with them, and are identified as similar to them. And on the other hand, we have outgroups, those that people view as too different to be considered as deserving of time, matter, or concern, something like that. Those elements will influence how people live in community and how they behave, mediated by those thoughts and beliefs that they have. Prejudices respond to different functions, actually. One of them is the utilitarian function or adjustment function that explains how people act in society to achieve a better lifestyle, getting rewards, avoiding punishments. This means that people will behave how they consider is well viewed in society, and go against those social prejudices will represent different punishments, like being ignored, being rejected, lose opportunities in different life fields like work, studies, and so on. Another function is the ego defensive function that blame other people for different deficiencies that we have as a community. And this is most of the times to avoid the self and other examination, talking about cultural items and social groups as well. Of course, these represent a less acceptance for different behaviors, beliefs, different items that we receive every day as we interact with different people in our daily life. So another one is the value expressive function. This exposes how people try to communicate their own values. They try to share them, values, beliefs, behaviors, feelings, because they consider are right. So this function has a close relationship with the ego defensive function, because they both consider that the only right values, beliefs, that the only thing that is right for everybody is their own behavior, their own point of view. And finally, we have the knowledge function. The knowledge function responds to the background or knowledge actually that we have. These have a big influence on different decisions in our lives. And there are different factors that affect this function. The concept that people have about something, the fears, different experiences, and of course the context that each group of people have, and many items that became part of people's background. So all these functions represent how different or how the prejudices create different limits and different things that divide society in, as we were mentioned before, different groups. And those functions will represent the differences that every culture has. And this is how we can explain, and this is how we can develop each one of them.